Okay, so it's recording now. So thank you all so much for joining us as part of the Freedom All Week of Action. So the goal for the webinar today is to help folks learn more about criminalization of survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault. And since April is Sexual Assault Awareness Month, we thought it would be a great time to really highlight the struggles and challenges that criminalized survivors face, and also how every one of us can really take action to free criminalized survivors who are currently fighting for their freedom. So there's more actions and events that are coming up later this week after this webinar, and so we really encourage folks to join us, and I'll talk about that a little bit at the end of the webinar. So in terms of logistics, if you're not speaking, if you could please mute yourself, that would, help us be able to, hear everyone and be able to share all the information. And if you have any questions throughout the webinar, you can send them using the chat box function. We'll have a Q&A at the end where participants can, or the speakers can address some of the questions that participants have. And we'll have the slides and information of speakers that will be sent out after the webinar. So you can expect that from us if you have registered for the webinar. So we have a very packed agenda, and that's because there's a lot of different freedom campaigns where folks are really organizing to gather support and work with currently incarcerated survivors who are fighting for freedom because they survived abuse. So I want to just read off the list of speakers for today. So we have Santara Matthews with the Free Crystal Kaiser Defense Committee and also Black and Pink Milwaukee. We have Red Schulte with Support Host Collective and Justice for Alisha Walker Defense Campaign, and also with Survived and Punished New York. Julie Kempner, who is with Survived and Punished New York and also with the Nikki Addimando Defense Committee. Dara Saeed with Survived and Punished California and also with Free Leah Campaign. Pinky Shear with Freedom Overground and Free Kai Campaign. Tammy Cooper Garvin with Survived and Punished California. Colby Lenz with Survived and Punished California, and also Survived and Punished and also California Coalition for Women Prisoners. Alisha Bieria with Survived and Punished. Holly Craig with Moms United Against Violence and Incarceration, based in Chicago. And Alex Chambers with the Free Shantonio Campaign, Free Hearts Nashville, who's based in Nashville, Tennessee. So you can see that, none of these, you can see that there's a ton of defense committees and campaigns throughout the country and various different parts. And you'll see throughout our presentation that all of these individual campaigns are not just about the one person that we're advocating for, that we're fighting alongside, but that it's part of a systemic issue of gender violence and criminalization that we're trying to highlight as well. So I'm really excited to have all of these speakers. So thank you all so much for joining us. And also want to acknowledge Daisy Vo, who is a volunteer with Survived and Punished, helping us out with some of the technical assistance and logistics for the webinar. So just wanted to express my thanks to everyone who's gonna make this webinar great. So just to set some context, up to 94% of people in some women's prisons are survivors of domestic violence and or sexual violence prior to their incarceration. And what that highlights is that the experiences of gender violence, whether it's domestic violence or sexual violence, is very much linked to experiences of policing, incarceration, and deportation as well. And so what we see is that, when we think about how do we protect survivors, I think a lot of the traditional anti-violence agents, DV agencies and advocates have relied on the criminal legal system, using the police and the courts as a way to prosecute abusers. But what we see in reality is that the system that the criminal legal system, the deportation system, the family court system, all of these systems actually don't work in favor of survivors, and in fact, survivors are punished for surviving abuse. And we also see this when we look at where our governmental funding and investments are going. So California is home to the largest number of people in women's prisons, and it actually has more prison beds than domestic violence shelter beds. And so what that highlights is that is a systematic lack of support for survivors who are seeking support. And it's also important to note that a lot of most survivors will not, the shelter or the hotline is not going to be the first place where folks are going to go. It's going to be their immediate support network that they're going to contact and try to get support from. So where does that leave us? And how do we support survivors who are caught in these systems of criminalization for surviving abuse? And so survivors have become targets of policing and prosecution, partly because survival actions are often criminalized. And those can include anything from self-defense, and we're going to have folks talk about a lot of different individual cases where self-defense was the reason for people serving time in prison and also facing deportation. Folks are also punished for migrating to a safer location or trying to avoid violence by agreeing or submitting to a coerced illegal activity. And a lot of the folks who are going to be speaking after me are going to highlight that. So when we continue to invest in systems that are inherently racist and ableist and anti-poor, anti-LGBTQ, and anti-women, and perpetuate all of these different systems of oppression, we have to ask ourselves, how do we protect survivors who by design are being left out and are being punished by both the criminal legal system, but family court, other systems of control, and also through immigration systems for refugee and immigrant survivors. So a lot of that to say, I want to read this quote from Marissa Alexander, who I think summarizes everything really well. So Marissa is a Black woman survivor who was facing up to 60 years in prison for firing a warning shot to defend herself from her abusive partner. And this case happened in Florida around the time when the murder of Trayvon Martin. George Zimmerman was being tried in Florida using stand your ground law, and she was not able to use that law because of the fact that she was not believed to be a survivor. And so she said, if you do everything to get on the right side of the law and it is a law that does not apply to you, where do you go from there? So I think that's important to think about, is that we keep passing all these laws to try to protect survivors, and it falls short. And part of that is because fundamentally, the system is designed to punish survivors. And then I wanted to also highlight this quote from, just to note that Marissa is free thanks to the efforts of community organizing. So I forgot to mention that. And also Nia, whose quote I wanted to share. Nia is also free thanks to community organizing. And she said this quote that stays with me, where she said, for the past 16 years, ICE and prisons have done my abuser's work of punishing me for him. Before prison, he isolated me from my community, controlled where I could go, who I could talk to, and what I could wear. While incarcerated, prisons and ICE have done the same thing to me. Still, I have hope that freedom will come soon, and I will join all of you. So I think, again, just to highlight that, all of these systems of incarceration and criminalization, they rely on isolation and the same dynamics of power and control as abusers do in an abusive relationship. And so I think that's important to really highlight, especially in light of many of us working in the field of fighting against gender-based violence. So now I'm gonna pass it on to Alisha Vieira with Survived and Punished to talk a little bit more in depth about, what does criminalization of self-defense look like, and what that, actually, I misspoke. I'm gonna pass it to Santera to talk about criminalization of self-defense and have Santera talk about that. So I'll pass it on to you, Santera.
Okay, sounds great. Thank you, Stacey. Can you all hear me? Yep, okay, sounds good. Okay, I'm gonna begin this conversation about the criminalization of self-defense with a story about a young woman named Celia. I learned about Celia through Miriam Kaba's organizing on the 2014 No Selves to Defend exhibit that she co-created with Rachel Kydor in Chicago. Celia was 19 years old at the time in 1855 when she killed her slave master, Robert Newsom. Prior to Newsom's death, Celia had endured 5 years of violence in Missouri at Newsom's hands. Celia was 14 years old when she was purchased by Newsom, a 6-year-old widower. On her way to the farm from the auction block, Newsom raped Celia and made it known what his intentions were with her. By the time she was 19 years old, Celia already had 2 of his children and was pregnant with a 3rd. Around this time, Celia began a relationship with another person who was enslaved on the farm named George. George insisted that Celia end the quote-unquote relationship with Newsom if she and George were to continue on their own. Celia approached Newsom's 2 daughters who lived on the farm and asked that they intervene to have Newsom stop assaulting her, but they refused. Newsom himself refused to stop when Celia approached him as well. One day, Newsom came to Celia's cabin and she wound up bludgeoning him to death. Celia decided to burn his body in her fireplace, then she called his grandson over to pick up the ashes and take him out. The next day, Newsom's family began looking for him, but couldn't find him, so they wound up interrogating George. Well, this ended up winding up to George implicating Celia, and so then she was interrogated next. Celia initially denied that she had killed Newsom, but after an intensive interrogation, she did admit to killing him, and she ended up going to trial. We know about Celia's case because in Missouri, there was a law that said if you are a woman and you are sexually violated and attacked, you have a right to self-defense. Celia was appointed 2 lawyers, but the state who argued this defense on her behalf. The court eventually decided that Celia was property, not person, and therefore she actually had no self to defend. After a quick appeal, Celia was hanged on December 21st, 1855. During the No Selves to Defend exhibit, Miriam brings up this important part, that they lifted Celia's story in the exhibit because we want people to understand that for most women of color, and especially for Black women in this country, the concept of invoking self-defense has not actually been easily acceptable. This denial of personhood will be a similarity we will discuss throughout the remainder of the webinar as we lift up the stories of criminalized survivors today. Back to you, Stacey. Oh, and then would you be able to go to the next slide, Stacey? Okay. Oh, should I just start talking about Crystal? Okay, cool. Okay, so then that brings us to our topic of Crystal Kaiser. So Crystal Kaiser was 17 years old when she was trafficked by Randy Villar from Milwaukee to Kenosha, Wisconsin, where she experienced ongoing physical and sexual abuse. The distance between Milwaukee and Kenosha is about 30 minutes. Milwaukee has a higher population of Black people than Kenosha. Kenosha is a predominantly white area. That's just an important note to bring up. Villar was under active investigation by the Kenosha Police Department for sexual violence with additional underage Black girls prior to his death. In February of 2018, Villar's house had been raided by the police after suspicions of child sexual abuse. And during this raid, they found 20 homemade pornography videos, including Villar, engaging in sexual abuse of underage Black girls. So the police knew about this, but didn't give this evidence over to the DA for a few months. But even when they found out about it, the DA still did nothing. Yeah, so according to Crystal and her legal counsel, on June 5th, 2018, Crystal resisted Villar's attempts to forcibly engage in sexual activity. During this struggle, Crystal shot Villar in an act of self-defense. Then she was charged with surviving violence. DA Gravely has stated to members of the public and media outlets that Crystal was merely hired as a prostitute and involved in a business transactions. These statements and the charges against Crystal signal to her family and the larger community that Black women and girls do not live lives worth living. He also talked about how Crystal was just a youth that was coming from a different community to like their community, and it had like heavily racialized languages. He was talking about how there was this Black girl that was coming to this predominantly white area to spread, just to like wreak havoc, when clearly that's not what was happening. So now Crystal is a 19-year-old Black girl from the Midwest. She enjoys reading science fiction novels, drawing, and has a super big love for her violin. She's a loving sister and daughter who is deeply missed by her family and broader community. Since this last fall, I've been organizing with the Hands Off Crystal Kaiser campaign, and this involves members of her family as well as other local organizers in Milwaukee. And our main objective has been to make sure that, or to demand that the DA drop all charges against Crystal. We've hosted many phone and email jams, raised money for Crystal so that her family could be able to visit her from Milwaukee in Kenosha, as well as to make sure that she has commissary and that her life, that she just has as much things as she can while in jail. We've held rallies in support of her and have done a lot of court watching events. You can get involved with this campaign also by contacting the DA. Stacey, would you be able to go to the next slide? Awesome, thanks. So you can email the DA this script and we'll send the slides out so that you'll have it. But basically just telling him like he has the power now to drop all of the charges. This could all be over. And we have to really continue to put that pressure on him. And then would you be able to go to the next slide? Thank you. Okay, so that little artwork is in the thing. That's Crystal. She wrote us a little thank you letter. We have so much artwork that we want to make into a zine. She also writes a lot that we want to make into a zine as well. So stay tuned for that. So you can actually write her at the Kenosha pretrial facility at that address. And she loves hearing from people and just getting letters and staying up to date with things. You can donate to her campaign. And you can also stay updated on our organizing efforts at freecrystal.wordpress.com or on our Facebook page. But yeah, thank you for letting me share this story. I just want, like, Crystal is as involved as she can be in this fight, and she's very grateful for everybody. So yeah, thank you so much. That's our story.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing, Santara. And I think it's important to note that, you know, we, all of these different survivor defense campaigns are in different stages of the criminalization process. And so I think there's many different ways to take action, including asking and demanding the DA to drop all the charges because, you know, right now Crystal hasn't been convicted at all and hasn't gone through the trial process, and so it's very important to think about that. And I'm seeing some questions about whether there would be the slides would be shared. We'll definitely share the slides, and then we may be able to share the recording as well. So we'll definitely follow up with more information so that you all have the contact information and ways to take action. So we'll definitely do that. So next up is the Justice for Alisha Walker campaign. So I'm going to pass it on to Red to talk about Alisha's campaign.
Thank you so much, Stacey. Can everyone hear me all right? Okay. Hey, y'all. Alisha Walker is a 27-year-old former sex working person originally from Akron, Ohio. In January of 2014, Alisha was contacted by a returning client, Alan Filan, who agreed to pay her and another sex worker for sex in his Orland Park house. When Alisha and the other sex worker arrived, Filan was very intoxicated and demanded that the sex be unprotected. Alisha and her fellow worker refused what they saw as unsafe services, asserting that Filan had to stick to their agreed upon terms. Filan became violent. he punched Alisha in the face before grabbing a knife from the kitchen. Phylon then threatened both women with the knife. Alisha struggled with him and managed to wrestle the knife away, stabbing him in self-defense. Both she and her fellow worker fled. Phylon was still alive when they left his house. Alisha was then arrested and charged with second-degree murder, despite no physical evidence ever being recovered. She was held without trial for 20 months in Cook County, and at her trial, the prosecutor portrayed Alisha as a manipulative criminal mastermind. He called her a monster and spoke disparagingly about her family and her profession as a sex worker. Her defense attorneys sexually harassed her and never requested bond. A jury convicted her of second-degree murder, and Alisha was sentenced to 15 years in prison. She is currently incarcerated at Decatur Correctional Center in Decatur, Illinois. Now, the violent combination of racism and whorephobia, coupled with her attackers' familial connections to the Chicago political machine, specifically that Phylon's sister is a judge in Cook County and was very close with Judge Obish, who presided over Lili's case, and Phylon's brother is a known and very famous lobbyist in Illinois. These facts are what Alisha attributes her harsh sentencing to. As Alisha has commented, quote, "When Obish sentenced me to 15 years, he basically said I should have died that night when my client attacked me. He basically said that my life didn't matter as much as that white man's. My punishment is another example of the racist and whorephobic violence of the police, the courts, and prisons," end quote. Then there's Cook County Sheriff Tom Dart's 15-year crusade against sex workers to factor in as well here. Dart has made it his life's work to persecute and criminalize, in his words, save sex workers and their clients. Dart is also responsible for aiding the FBI in rebranding and implementing its John stings and raids on sex workers nationwide. Alisha now will be the first person to remind you that what happened to her is nothing new. She'll be the first one to cite the felt history of anti-sex worker stigma, what we in the sex worker community call whorephobia, and criminalization. Early on, when she and I talked about Mariam Kaba's writings on Black women having no self to defend, like what Santara was talking about earlier, Lili would light up with angry excitement, and she would exclaim, and I have this quote here I want to share, "Yeah, that's exactly fucking right. They don't want us to survive, but sometimes we do, and here I am." The Support Host Collective, utilizing amazing resources and the comradeship of Survived and Punished, have built a grassroots defense and mutual care campaign alongside Lili and her family for 4 years now. So many people on this call have been intrinsic in supporting us throughout this work. We've created artistic resistance through visual works, amplified Alisha's poetry practice, fundraised, held demonstrations, made consciousness-raising zines for fellow sex workers, and demanded our comrades on the left center sex workers' experiences when developing their analyses. We've been able to do all of this because of intentional relationship building and learning alongside Lili and other incarcerated sex working comrades that she has connected us with. Since all of Alisha's appeals have been denied, we've focused more now intensely on a clemency campaign, honing in on Governor J.B. Pritzker's purported progressivism, and of course maintaining material support and commissary aid for Alisha while she's inside. We've established a post-release fund that people can contribute toward. And Stacy, if you want to move to the next slide. Thank you. We've also begun to work with Hacking Hustling, another sex worker-led collective, to co-create a funded project and work for Alisha that she's helped design and contributed to for when she's home. And we've also secured housing for her post-release. Alisha has 19 months left unless J.B. Pritzker can be forced to do the right thing and free every single person incarcerated in Illinois during this pandemic. Please follow our work and support and uplift our friend using the socials mentioned on the slides. Thanks, y'all.
Thank you so much for sharing, Red. And I think it's important to highlight some of the specific challenges that incarcerated folks face, especially during this global COVID-19 pandemic, because social distancing is not possible when you're incarcerated. And so I think the urgency is definitely even more intensified. And so it's really great to have all these speakers and all of you on the webinar today to take action so that we can free all criminalized survivors and everyone else also who are currently incarcerated. So thank you so much for sharing, Fred. So next, I'd love to introduce Julie, who is going to talk about Nikki Addimando's defense campaign. So I'll pass it on to you, Julie.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us tonight. Nicole Addimando, affectionately known as Nikki, is a young mother and talented artist of two from Poughkeepsie, New York, who survived 10 years of abuse from her partner, who is also the father of her children. The abuse, physical, sexual, psychological, and emotional, started early in the relationship and escalated, following the pattern of many relationships with perpetrators of violence. It was also marked by many attempts by Nikki to get help from healthcare providers and local agencies. She lived in fear of her partner, but also in fear of potentially losing custody of her children as she sought help. At one point, Child Protective Services visited them based on an anonymous call by someone who knew of her injuries. Ultimately, after a fight and multiple threats in which he threatened to kill her, Nikki shot her partner. In April of 2019, she was convicted of second-degree murder after a trial in which she was portrayed in the most negative light possible, as a woman who, rather than acting in self-defense, planned to kill her partner. This happened in spite of ample evidence and documentation of the years of abuse and her injuries. 1 month later, in May of 2019, the Domestic Violence Survivors Justice Act, otherwise known as the DVSJA, was passed in New York State after 10 years of tireless work by survivors and currently and previously incarcerated women. The new law was welcomed as a way to acknowledge all that we know about domestic violence and provide relief in the form of reduced sentencing for survivors. Yet the criteria for relief are narrowly crafted and hard to prove. The law requires that the person be a victim of domestic violence, that there has been substantial abuse, that such abuse was a significant contributing factor to the offense charged, and that a sentence under the prior guidelines would be unduly harsh. The sentencing hearing took place in September of 2019 and lasted several days. Ultimately, it repeated the same kind of abuse and criminalization of survival that it was meant to alleviate. It was, to a certain extent, a replay of the trial, acknowledging none of the intent of the law, which was to provide relief to survivors such as Nikki. It disregarded the reasons why people don't leave: fear of retaliatory violence, loss of possible custody, and financial dependence on a partner. In addition, women are most likely to be killed while trying to leave. The judge decided not to sentence Nikki using the DVSJA, which would have provided for a determinate sentence of 5 to 15 years, saying that she had not met the law's criteria. Incomprehensibly, in the face of tremendous evidence to the contrary, the judge ruled that there wasn't a quote unquote definitive end quote finding regarding her abuse and that she had support and assistance to leave. He claimed further that she had a myriad of non-lethal options at her disposal, thereby concluding that the abuse was not a significant contributing factor to the offense charged. Since the law is brand new, the decision potentially set the stage for judges both in that jurisdiction and others to follow suit in refusing to use the new law and apply it to the facts of the case in the way it was intended to be used. Instead, it repeated the criminalization of survivors and ensured that Nikki and others and their families would be subjected to the abuse of incarceration for decades to come. If not for Nikki and individuals like Nikki, who was this law meant for? It raises the questions of who will have been abused enough, how much abuse will make it a significant contributing factor. It completely reinforces the binary of good versus bad survivor by sending a message that she had no right to defend herself in the face of harm and possible death. How will that same system that promotes the criminalization of survival fairly evaluate the operationalization of this new law and practice? The failure to apply the DVSJA to Nikki's case sent a strong message that people who choose to survive will be further criminalized by the same system, which will continue to be biased against acts of survival and self-defense. Now, Nikki is currently incarcerated at Bedford Hills Maximum Security Correctional Facility. Now, like all of our incarcerated comrades and loved ones, at risk of possible death. Since in spite of the coronavirus pandemic, Governor Cuomo has remained steadfast in his refusal to release people using his clemency powers. We will continue to fight for Nikki and all survivors. To find out more about how to support Nikki right now, there's a website called westandwithnikki.com, and that is spearheaded by her sister Michelle and her best friend Elizabeth. For more on the Domestic Violence Survivors Justice Act and other quote unquote criminal justice reforms of the past year, tomorrow be on the lookout for Survived and Punished New York release of our report, which is a discussion of the recent criminal justice reforms through an abolitionist lens, which includes an analysis of the Domestic Violence Survivors Justice Act. Thank you. And if there are any questions, please let me know. And I can send out more information about the website and other ways to support. I can forward them to you, Stacy, and they can be sent out.
Thank you so much, Julie. I think what Nikki's case highlights is just the impossible standards and standards and thresholds that survivors are measured up against. And so, whether, when survivors are unable to leave, then they are judged and also punished for not leaving. But then when they do take the necessary actions to be able to leave an abusive environment and to escape violence, and they're also punished for not leaving the right way or not having, there's always, the victim blaming is just very apparent in every single one of these cases, but also with Nikki's case, given the new law that was just passed that promised a lot of, or had a lot of potential and promise. And so we have to keep continuing to push to advocate for Nikki's freedom and everyone else's freedom. So thank you so much for sharing, Julie. So next we have Netta from the Free Leah campaign. So I'll pass it on to you, Netta, to share more about Leah's campaign.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Stacy. Hi, everyone. My name is Netta. I'm an organizer with Survived and Punished California and a member of the Free Leah campaign. I'm grateful to be on this call with all these amazing organizers and co-conspirators that I've learned so much from. So thank you, everyone. So as Stacy mentioned, I am part of the Free Leah campaign. Leah Bidu is a Black immigrant from Ethiopia who was incarcerated for defending herself against her abusive ex-husband. She experienced years of abuse, including racialized verbal and physical abuse and debilitating isolation from her community. On one night of escalated physical violence, she defended herself, fearing for her life, and shot at her ex-husband with a gun in the house that she was scared he would use against her. He later recovered from surgery, and she was charged with assault and domestic violence. After serving her 6-year sentence, Leah was promptly arrested by ICE as she left prison and was taken to Yuba County Jail in California, which rents space to ICE for folks to be held pending deportation. The Free Leah campaign, which includes folks from Survived and Punished California and the California Immigrant Youth Justice Alliance, came together when we got word of Leah's situation after her transfer to detention to fight for her freedom. Next slide, please. Thank you. Leah's criminalization is absolutely characterized by the legal system's treatment of her as a Black immigrant woman, so I want to share about how this impacted her at every step of the way. Her story exemplifies what we mean when we say survivors are supposed to be quote unquote the perfect victim, which Stacy just went over for us a little bit. So she chose to defend herself. Black women are characterized as being inherently more violent or aggressive, and she's also an undocumented immigrant. So the criminal legal system doesn't see these communities as people who are worthy of protecting, so laws haven't been made to protect them. but instead as communities that are to be punished into behaving in a way that's deemed respectable. So Leah's story exemplifies all of these important intersections. Her husband, in addition to the various forms of abuse, but one particular method was racialized verbal abuse, and he assured her that no one would believe her because he was white and she was Black. And the system proved him right. So we see this in the various ways that she's been disproportionately criminalized. So to start, on the evening that the violence particularly escalated and Leah defended herself, she also called 911. When the police arrived, they found Leah visibly harmed, but didn't investigate the violence against her and instead charged her, even though they had documented the physical marks she had on her body. During her case, the judge refused to believe Leah and found that she was not a survivor, even though California law requires judges to consider if someone is a survivor of intimate partner violence in their sentencing. She also faced incredibly aggressive prosecution by the district attorney's office and ultimately ended up accepting a plea deal because of that. She did appeal, and Leah's appeal was dismissed by then California Attorney General Kamala Harris. You might have heard of her. She argued that the record was unclear as to whether she was really a survivor. And that was the basis for the dismissal of her appeal. And as I mentioned, the additional layer of criminalization around her being undocumented, upon release, she was immediately transferred to ICE detention. So as we've talked about, all of these cases, including Leah's, are exceptional, but not the exception. Black women, particularly immigrants, are incarcerated and deported at over twice the rate of white women. And this statistic, I think most of us have heard, but over 90% of incarcerated women are survivors of domestic violence and or sexual assault. So you must continue to free these folks on the basis that we need to free them all because the carceral system does not address domestic violence or sexual violence, but rather perpetuates it. Next slide, please. Cool. So taking action, currently the status is that Leah is still in detention at Yuba and her best chance at freedom is a pardon from California Governor Newsom. Last month, we got some good news. The courts granted Leah a stay of removal, which means we have a little bit more time to organize against her deportation. Some things we've done, we have a petition with almost 40,000 signatures. We've held a rally at the Capitol where we delivered our petition to the governor. As you can imagine, 40,000 signatures is a lot of pages and it was really heavy, but we haven't heard back from him yet. We've also coordinated several virtual days of action where folks were urged to contact the governor's office and ask him to take action. And we've coordinated a postcard campaign, as well as ongoing support to Leah herself directly. So ways to support now. Luckily, you don't have to wait long. We have a day of action tomorrow, so you can join us on your phones and on Twitter to urge Governor Newsom to free Leah and free them all during this pandemic. The links in the slides and should be shared out after this, in addition to all the other links in the presentation. So at this time, it's really important for us to show that with this pandemic, no one should be incarcerated, and also for Leah's case, that she has public support. Another way to participate in the campaign is to sign and share her petition. The petition, as I mentioned, currently has almost 40,000 signatures, and we want to keep these numbers growing, again, because showing public support is so crucial in survivor defense campaigns and really helps us win. Next, one thing that's really important is just raising awareness. So talk to folks you know about this case. You can even do something more formalized like hosting a teach-in. It's really important to spread the word so we can have even more people joining us and advocating for Leah. So to do this to support, we have curriculum that we can share with you if you're interested. The next thing is letters. Survivors share over and over that letter writing can be a lifeline through prison walls. You can use snail mail or use the link I've shared to drop her a note online and we'll send it for you. It means so much to Leah when she hears from folks who support her. She always shares her gratitude and always tells us that seeing the words from her supporters is what gives her hope and positivity to keep fighting her case. So we have her information and a letter writing guide also on our website. The next thing that's helpful is raising money for her commissary at any time, but also especially with everything going on right now. It's really helpful to just offer support with some of folks' basic needs when they're inside. Next slide, please. Awesome. So stay connected. You can follow up with us anytime at freeleah@gmail.com if you have any questions or want to share with us ways you want support or want some insight on how to do so, or you want to see our teaching curriculum or anything else. And you can learn more about Leah on our website, and then a link to this article I've shared written by Alisha at Color of Change and Nana Baji co-authored a really great piece just making connections and highlighting the intersections of why Leah should be free. And you can also stay updated by following us on Twitter. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much for that overview, Netta. And I think especially for Leah's case, it highlights how immigrant and refugee survivors, because of their immigration status, they are punished again for the third time by the deportation system, even after having completed their prison sentence. So I think it's really important to just continue to advocate for survivors like Leah, who are continuing to fight for their freedom in immigration detention. So thank you so much for sharing. So next we have the Free Kai Peterson campaign. And so I'm gonna pass it to Pinky with Freedom Overground. So take it away, Pinky.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Yes?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Okay, so Kai Peterson is a trans man who is currently serving a 15-year prison sentence for defending himself against sexual assault. He and his brothers, he was walking home from a convenience store in his neighborhood, and a man approached him, knocked him out, dragged him into an abandoned mobile home next door to his home, and assaulted him. His brothers heard his younger brothers heard the attack happening as it was happening while they were also on their way home, and they went in and tried to stop it. Kai took the man's gun and shot him, and the boys attempted to cover it up. This was not the first time that Kai had been sexually assaulted in this area, so he was afraid that if he had told them that he was afraid that if he had reported it, he would be charged with murder, which obviously he was. They did do a rape kit, and it was positive. He was shown to have been pretty aggressively assaulted. Once he was taken into custody, the police interrogated his younger brothers, who were of the ages of 14 and 16 at the time, without any parent consent or parent present or a guardian or support person in the room. And when Kai explained to them that he had been sexually assaulted and that he wanted to plead self-defense, the positive rape kit came back, but the GBI told him that we don't have self-defense in the state of Georgia, which was a lie. Georgia is a stand your ground state. In a stand your ground state, much like Florida and Marissa Alexander, in a very similar case, is that you have the right to defend yourself and or persons near you if you believe that your life is in danger. In 2016, the Advocate magazine did a full, huge article about Kai explaining his entire story. They interviewed his public defender, and his public defender, they asked him why they denied Kai the right to plead self-defense. And he said, quote, number one, you're African-American, and these little old white ladies in South Georgia think that if they see an African-American outside their own neighborhoods, they need to be careful. The second strike against Kai is that he looks stereotypically gay. So Kai was literally denied the right to plead self-defense because of his race and his gender identity. At this point, they offered him a plea deal. The first plea deal that they offered him was 30 years in prison. And when he turned down the first that they offered, a second plea deal, which was 20 years for involuntary manslaughter deal that he accepted. Can you hear me? Okay, sorry. So in comparison, I would like to make a really stark comparison to what we're looking at. CC McDonald is a trans woman of color who was facing the exact same self-defense charges at the same time in a different part of the country. The first plea deal that they offered Cece was 7 years for second degree, and she did not take it. Ultimately, she ended up taking another plea deal where she was given 41 months and she served 19. In Georgia, the first plea deal that Kai received was, like I said, 30 years, and he ended up having to take a 20-year sentence. But the crazy part about it was it's an illegal sentence, because the max amount of time that you can get for involuntary manslaughter is 10 years in the state of Georgia. Now, when we pointed that out and we made a very huge public fuss about it in the media, the state of Georgia decided to take Kai back to court to adjust his sentence. But instead of changing his sentence of 20 years to 10 to match the charge he was given, they changed it from they changed his charge to voluntary manslaughter to match the sentence they gave him. Now, there's a couple of reasons for this. One of them is because we had gone through extensive attempts to kind of, if you will, put the state of Georgia on blast for how wrongly they did Kai Peterson. But at the same time, the other reason is because Georgia is a labor-based prison system, and they are not trying to give up their prisoners. Georgia is one of the most difficult states in the country to get someone out of prison. The governor in Georgia cannot pardon anyone. It has to go through the Board of Pardons and Paroles. And he has no power at all in giving anyone a pardon in the state of Georgia. No governors can do that. So the state of Georgia actually changed his charge to match the sentence of 20 years so that they would not be taking any time off at all. And they claimed that it was a clerical error. So on all of the documents that Kai had signed that said that he was taking a plea deal for involuntary manslaughter, and it said involuntary manslaughter, I think 27 different documents, there was a clerical error on all of those. So far, Kai has been incarcerated since 2011. During his incarceration, he has been fighting for transgender rights for prisoners. His original release date was for October of 2026. Last year, due to all of the efforts and the work that we have put in, the DOC has changed his release date to July of 2021. Currently, he's waiting to be moved to the Metro Transitional Center, where he will participate in the work release program for the last year of his sentence. Now, at the end of February, he did lose his brother, and we all have written a letter to the judge requesting that Kai be released because his brother was the primary care provider for his mom, who is disabled. And so we're still waiting to hear if the judge is going to accept the early release for Kai, because we are trying to get him home so that he can help support his mother and his nieces and the rest of his family. Can we move to the next slide, please, Stacey? Okay, 2 years ago, one of the things that is not often talked about in the process of supporting people who are incarcerated, and this is something that I really wanted to bring up, is retaliation against the folks that we're supporting. Kai started facing a lot of backlash. There was a point in which when he requested hormones for his transition, and they were not giving them, and he had his own website. We were utilizing his Facebook and his social media and doing everything, and we had his name all over all of it. And the state of Georgia actually made policies against the use of sending screenshots, of taking photos from the internet, against the use of any kind of social media for any kind of inmate, because of the work that we were doing for Kai Peterson. He had lost his ability that we were doing. He was doing interviews. So you have to be really, really careful about retaliation against the person that you're trying to support, because sometimes it can do a little bit more harm than it can good. He was placed in lockdown. He was placed in solitary confinement. He was pepper sprayed in the face, handcuffed, and left in a solitary cell for 2 days with pepper spray all over him. They put a bag of 100 pills in his property and would bang on the door and tell him to kill himself on a regular. And all of that was because of the public attention that his case was getting that particular prison. So what we decided to do to protect Kai was we started Freedom Overground. And as a prisoner support organization who doesn't just support one person, but multiple people, the state of Georgia can no longer retaliate against Kai because he is one of our clients, and our efforts are now supporting not just him, but other people in the TGNC community. Our efforts to help to release Kai have been very effective in reducing his sentence by about 5 years. But one of the people that I know in the governor's office, he said to me that, yes, we are working on getting him out. However, we can't make it look like we're bending to public pressure. So basically what they did was they put him through all of these programs in an attempt to take time off. So that he can get time off for good behavior, yada, yada, yada. But our efforts have included 2 different petitions, which have gained nearly 20,000 signatures, as well as the Free Kai Project, which is done by a member of his TGNC community. And you can see images of the Free Kai Project here. Excuse me, one of the key factors in helping us to get the reduction, like I said before, was a lot of heavy media coverage. And he now has people who are supporting him all over the world, Amsterdam, France, England, just everywhere. And it's, unfortunately, it doesn't matter how many people you have supporting you or where they are in the world. In the Deep South, because we are in a prison-based and a labor-based prison system, they are not trying to release anyone from prison that they consider to be an asset. And the prisoners are considered property here. All of their clothes say property of state of Georgia. Not the clothes themselves are property, but the human beings are property. And in many of the meetings that I have been to and heard, and according to the government, they don't refer to the folks who are in prisons as prisoners. They refer to them as assets. And that is literally what they call them, the assets.
Pinky, we can't hear you anymore. Pinky? Oh, we might be experiencing some technical difficulties. Let's give. Oh,
I'm sorry.
okay.
Hello?
I think we can hear you. Okay.
Okay, I'm sorry.
You're back now. No worries. All good.
Okay, so as I was saying is you have to be prepared to do whatever you can to protect the person that you are trying to fight for. And like I said, we created Freedom Overground for that purpose. By supporting other TGNC prisoners, we are also supporting survivors of assault. 100% of our clients here in Georgia were assaulted prior to or during their incarceration, 100%. And that is a strong statement towards the trauma to prison pipeline. And so the ways that you can help are you can sign the petition, which are in the link. The fundraiser for Kai. Now, the fundraiser for Kai, we were originally raising funds to help him get a place to live once he is done with the TC. However, now we are doing a familial support because his brother had passed away. So all the money that we had originally raised to purchase a home for him, we had to pay that money so that Kai could attend his brother's funeral. And he chose to use that money to pay his brother's funeral services after his brother died. In the car accident. So now we're starting over for his housing and support after. And then the last thing is the Free Kai Project. And the Free Kai Project is through Facebook. A lot of people have gotten involved. You take a picture, you put a statement, and then you hashtag Free Kai. And then just send it in. And really that has been a huge part of our media campaign, because we've gotten international recognition through this Free Kai project, photo project. Thousands and thousands, I would say almost 10,000 photos have been submitted since we started the project in 2016. So it's been an incredible asset for us. And you can also go to our website, which is freedomoverground.org. Unfortunately, we are doing updates this week, so the website is down, but it will be back up again next week with our new projects, which is Limitless Letters, and that's TGNC, disabled community can write to the trans community inside. And that's all. But thank you all so much for your support and for participating in the event this evening.
Thank you so much, Pinky, for sharing the Free Kai campaign. I think what Kai's story and his struggle for freedom demonstrates is some of the specific challenges that trans and gender nonconforming folks face inside, especially related to violence and discrimination folks experience both on the outside but also inside the prison, especially with heightened increased rate of sexual violence and gender-based violence folks face based on their gender identity or gender expression. So thank you so much for highlighting and continuing to work for Kai's freedom. So thank you for being here. So the next freedom campaign that I'd like to introduce is the Free Brandy Scott campaign. And so I'm gonna pass it to Tammy and Colby with Survived and Punished. So take it away, Tammy and Colby.
Thank you, Stacy. Can you all hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
I'm gonna start off and then pass it over to Tammy. So Brandy Scott, the pictured here, quite a few years ago now, is a Black trans woman who is incarcerated in California at the California Institution for Women just east of LA. She's been incarcerated for over a decade now, criminalized for self-defense. She's also a friend and an organizer inside, and she's somebody that the Survived and Punished California prison visiting team visits. Is that coming from me? No? I'm hearing some kind of feedback. And so Brandy, so we are highlighting Brandy today, but we are visiting quite a few people, and we have quite a few public petitions on the Survived and Punished California commutations page. So maybe one of my many friends and organizers can post that in the chat. But we really strongly encourage everyone to sign all of these petitions. It really matters to show public support in California for commutations. And also, as we all know, this is a particularly stressful, dangerous time for people who are incarcerated. The prisons are very overcrowded in California and probably everywhere. And so we're pushing for clemency for everybody, and we encourage you to sign these petitions. And then, so for Brandy, the petition that you can also access from the link on the slide is a petition for her commutation, for her to be granted clemency and immediate release. And we partnered with the Transgender Intersex Gender Justice Project, TGIJP in California, to do this public petition in support of Brandy. And Brandy was prosecuted for defending herself from an abusive ex who broke into her apartment. And she ended up taking a plea deal for 22 years, even though her public defender was, fighting and hoping for an acquittal. Brandy was reasonably scared, especially of racist, transphobic, entire criminal legal system. And she had had a prior, so she'd been through that before. And they were threatening her with a, life sentence, and she decided to plead to the 22. So the 22 is voluntary manslaughter. And because they admitted, that it was a self-defense case. And then she was given a gun enhancement of about the same time. And so at this point, she's already served her base term, which she should have never been sentenced to in the first place. And now she's serving time on enhancements alone. And as we've seen all across the country, right, the long-term incarceration, kind of permanent mass incarceration, is in part fueled by these absurd, very long enhancements. Brandy faces various barriers to release, including the fact that she survives daily really profound anti-trans gender violence in prison, especially from the guards. And so she has, had to defend herself in various ways, and also has had false charges put on her that's one of the effects of the targeting that she faces. And so we need more public support, even more public support for people like Brandy, to show that the community wants her home and sees the kind of anti-trans violence, especially against trans women in prison, that comes from the guards as a major problem and not a reason to deny her freedom. And so I think I will do a special introduction of Tammy now, and Tammy can talk more. She's known Brandy for many years as well. Tammy Cooper Garvin, some of you knew as Tammy Garvin, and many people I think signed petitions to support Tammy's freedom. And Tammy's here with us now, which is so exciting. She's also a criminalized survivor who was sentenced to life without parole and then commuted under Governor Brown, and released in 2019. Tammy did 28 years. And she's with us now to also advocate for Brandy and the freedom of all survivors. So Brandy, I think you got to unmute. Oh, there you go.
Did.
You got it. You got it.
It's working. You're good, Tammy. Oh,
Now, am I okay?
yeah, you're good. You're good.
Okay. I've been knowing Brandy since 2011 when I worked with the Women's Advisory Council, and how I met her was she was locked up in her room in building, 13. I said building 514. She wouldn't come out of the room because she was shunned by the prison public. She was shunned by police. The police would give inmates things to do to her. Some inmates followed the command of the police to do bad things to Brandy. Brandy is a beautiful woman. She's a very loving and kind person also. And she deserves another chance at freedom. The prison still, they block her in so many ways to go to self-help groups. She has started, I'm trying to think of the name of the self-help group, Kobe, that she started inside a prison, a committee. And I think for transgender, trans women, she's deserving. She's a victim of domestic violence. And Governor Newsom, you are against domestic violence. So we're begging you to please free Brandy Scott.
Thank you, Tammy. So please, please go to the petition link. We'll put it in the chat if somebody didn't already. It will mean so much to all of us and to Brandy herself. She is often just baffled at how it could be that people are okay with the ways that we send survivors to prison. And we're really looking forward to a time when she can join us on these webinars outside too. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Colby and Tammy. And I think this is, I think Tammy being here and continuing to advocate for her friends and loved ones inside, I think that just speaks to the power of all of us working together to continue to advocate for freedom for all survivors and for everyone outside of prisons. And so just want to honor that and thank you both for continuing to fight for Brandy's freedom. So thank you both for sharing. So those are the self-defense cases that we wanted to highlight. And we have one last section highlighting failure to protect cases. And so I'm going to pass it off to Alisha to talk about, what is failure to protect and how has that been used against survivors in their incarceration and so on. So I'll pass it on to you, Alisha.
Thanks, Stacy. So failure to protect is a law that has been criminally punishing survivors for failing to protect their children from being exposed to domestic violence, or failing to prevent their batterers, and failing in quotes always, to prevent their batterers' abuse of their children. Failure to protect convictions disproportionately punish mothers. Very few men have been punished with this law or this legal theory. And it's a perfect storm for survivors who are mothers, because mothers are 3 times more likely to experience domestic violence than women without children. Failure to protect laws both emerge from and reinforce multiple political ideologies, particularly what we call hyper-culpable motherhood or hyper-blamable motherhood and pro-incarceration agendas. By hyper-culpable motherhood, what I mean is that failure to protect is remarkably flexible, as prosecutors and judges have used a wide range of actions by survivors as evidence of criminal mothering. Stacy mentioned this before. Survivors have been found guilty if they don't successfully defeat their abusive partner, or if they fight back, if they don't escape, or if they try to escape, if they take their child to receive medical help from the abuse, or if they try to tend to their children themselves. If judges believe that they are genuinely victims of domestic violence, or if judges believe that they are lying about the abuse. Any of these kinds of scenarios can be manipulated back to the project of blaming mothers and mothers who are survivors for the violent actions of their abusers. Further, mothers who are Black, Native, trans, or queer, imprisoned, immigrant, or socially marginalized in other ways are particularly vulnerable to being constructed in courts or by courts as blameworthy, violent, deviant, criminal, or otherwise failed mothers. The other issue that drives failure to protect prosecutions is prosecutorial discretionary power, which basically means that prosecutors get to determine what law they're going to use to prosecute or criminalize the person, and how many years, what the sentence is going to look like. So basically, the prosecutors are incentivized for maximizing the number of people they can incarcerate, and they're also incentivized for maximizing the length of time for which they are incarcerated. So as that incentivizing became increasingly normalized, the notion that survivors ought to be punished for either exposing their children to domestic violence or for their batterers' violence against their children became increasingly taken for granted. Failure to protect laws catalyzes criminal prosecution of survivors. They can be charged with a number of different things. Sometimes in the law, there's a particular law that states that it's about child endangerment or failure to protect. But other times in many states, the failure to protect ideology or legal theory is used to criminalize or prosecute a survivor for a much more serious crime in order to basically increase the sentence that they're going to get. For example, in California, we supported Kelly Ann Savage. She tragically, her partner killed her child while she was in the process of trying to escape, and she could have been charged with child endangerment. First of all, obviously, she shouldn't be charged at all. But the prosecutor could have chosen to charge her with child endangerment, which would have gotten her 3 to 5 years, but instead decided to charge her with first-degree murder for aiding and abetting, which then got her life without parole. And so because of these kinds of, these patterns of maximizing sentencing and making sure that survivors are getting criminalized and they're getting as long sentences as the prosecutors can figure out how to win, failure to protect is a significant part of the process of criminalizing survivors. I have on the slide also some strategies to support survivors who are being targeted for failure to protect prosecutions. It includes coalition building between advocates for adult and child survivors of domestic violence. What we've seen is sometimes the advocates for adult survivors and advocates for child survivors are, don't necessarily work together, are sometimes actually working against one another. And what we want to see is advocates who have either an abolitionist framework or an anti-criminalizing framework figure out a way to build stronger coalitions with one another. We also are asking organizers and advocates to expose and challenge how the judicial system is a part of domestic violence rather than some kind of objective system that is evaluating something. I think we saw with Nia's quote earlier, made it perfectly clear. She said, ICE and prisons have done my abuser's work of punishing me for him. So we're asking people to really understand how the judicial system is just an extension of the battering that survivors are experiencing. And therefore, we think that organizers and friends and family of survivors who are being criminalized should target courts as key sites of organizing. So that can look like court watches that gather data about patterns of judges and attorneys, or it can look like court watch as part of defense campaigns. So, making sure that the judge sees that the survivor has a lot of community support and so on. We have toolkits on the Survive and Punish website that shows you how to do both. And finally, we are advocating for partnerships between victim services and grassroots defense campaigns, because historically those two things have tended to be alienated from one another. But we think that if they are connected, we'll have a better chance of showing how pernicious laws like failure to protect are against survivors. So with that, I will pass the mic over to the other speakers.
Great. Thank you so much, Lisa, for that overview on failure to protect. I think what's really striking about failure to protect is that our state or the government's failure to protect survivors is instead shifted onto survivors to take ownership of. And I think that victim blaming and punishing survivors is just a key feature of the failure to protect laws. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Alex, who's going to talk about the Free Shantonio Hunter campaign. So I'll pass it on to you, Alex.
Thank you, Stacy. Can everybody hear me? Clearly, okay.
Yeah.
Shantonio Hunter is a Black woman survivor from Nashville whose son died in 2014 at the hands of her abuser. He kept her from calling for help until her son stopped breathing. She was prosecuted for felony murder and aggravated child abuse and neglect, facing up to life in prison. Right before her trial in 2017, she signed a plea deal for 28 years at 100% for second-degree murder, which is, of the cases of failure to protect we've identified in Tennessee so far, one of the harshest sentences. Many of those other cases being of less harsh sentences being white women. Shantonio's trial attorney initially sought out local DV experts by reaching out to mainstream anti-violence community organizations, but they would not testify because of their relationship to the police department or state of Tennessee. This is a clear example of how the alliance between anti-violence organizations and law enforcement leaves criminalized survivors behind. In a motion to exclude the expert testimony, the DA argued that Shantonio's experience of domestic violence was irrelevant to the case. In other words, as a mother survivor, Shantonio is held as hyper culpable. She should be punished for not being able to predict or control the violence of another, and for not taking action in ways that are approved by the state. Through participatory defense, we called on the DA to drop all charges, but the state would not budge, hence the plea deal of at 100%. Most recently, Shantonio petitioned for post-conviction relief, which was denied at the end of January this year. Our next steps will be strategizing around seeking clemency. For now, we ask people to follow us on social media and a website, which I will post in the chat. From there, you can send Shantonio notes of support, donate to our Survivor Commissary Fund for Shantonio and other survivors in Tennessee, and keep an eye out for forthcoming demands for the Tennessee governor to release all those in Tennessee jails and prisons, including survivors. That's it.
Thank you so much, Alex, for sharing Shantonio's campaign. I think, I think it's just a lot of the regional and local context is so important. And I think for those of us who are connected to DV agencies that provide direct service, we need to continue to encouraging and pushing organizations to also support criminalized survivors, because they are also survivors and every agency should be serving them. And so I think that anecdote that you shared is really heartbreaking, and it just shows that we have so much more work to do. So the last campaign that we'll be highlighting today is the Free Joy Ramos campaign. And I know Holly's going to share some of the work that's happening in Chicago and Illinois broadly. So I'll pass it on to you, Holly, to share more about Joy's case and also all of the other ongoing active work that's happening to fight for the freedom of criminalized survivors.
Thank you so much. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. So also shout out to my beloved comrade, Monica Cosby, who I believe is on the call too. 20-year survivor of IDOC and just an incredible organizer. So Joy Ramos has been incarcerated in Cook County Jail, which is now the largest single site of confirmed cases of COVID-19 since September of 2017. Joy had been living with her mother and her boyfriend had moved in. And she came home one day from work to find her 3-year-old son unresponsive in the care of her boyfriend at the time. She immediately brought him to the emergency room where he was tragically declared dead. And the police then asked Joy to come in to answer some questions, and she assumed that those would be questions about her boyfriend in whose care her child had been, only to find that she herself was arrested and charged. Joy is a longtime survivor of all kinds of abuse, like many of us, many of the folks with whom we're working in community and in solidarity, inside and outside of those cages. And she had been suspicious of the state and not reached out for help previously in the midst of the violence and abuse that she was experiencing and her children were experiencing, because she did not trust the state to help her. And I think that that was only confirmed by the fact that they then charged her for the outcome of her boyfriend's abuse and violence. So in a situation that I think is a little unusual, but not surprising given what we've seen in terms of charging patterns in these kinds of cases, where mothers charged under a statute or a theory of failure to protect are often sentenced more harshly than their abuser, as in the case of Tondaleo Hall and others we know about. I think sort of the logical conclusion has sort of arrived at Joy Ramos in a way, because Joy is singularly charged in this case, despite the fact the state does not allege that she herself killed her child, but has charged her with first-degree murder under a theory of accountability. We don't have a failure to protect statute as such in Illinois. I think there are about 29 states that do, but we have a very broad theory of accountability that captures lots of survivors in different ways, and we're supporting a lot of them, pre-trial and post-conviction. So we've done all kinds of things in support of Joy, in the way that we've done participatory work around Naomi Freeman and Koresh Shoemaker and Paris Knox and a number of other people. And along with other organizations, Love and Protect and the Chicago Community Bond Fund, and Survived and Punished as a national network. These relationships are just crucial in building support and sharing information and resources. And so we've sort of built up this kind of community mitigation, where we created a video that interviews a bunch of people in Joy's life, that also sort of gives context to her as a person. And she's an awesome person, by the way, beautiful, brilliant, hilarious. I can't wait for y'all to meet her. And we've done all kinds of research in collaboration with Alex and Alisha and all the folks here about failure to protect and its history. We've looked at sort of the specific history of violence that Joy has experienced and presented all of that to the court as a kind of mitigation that has come from a community of survivors and advocates. We've brought lots of people to court every time. We reached out to all kinds of organizations who do anti-violence work, and as Alex mentioned, and Alisha and other folks here, it's been a bit of a challenge because the domestic violence organizations often rely, well, almost exclusively rely very heavily on this larger criminalization apparatus to defend survivors by prosecuting those identified as batterers or perpetrators, even though some, the survivorship is complicated. And so we've had trouble sometimes engaging them around this case also because it very tragically involves the death of a child. And I think some of the organizations are reluctant to touch that, particularly the broader family services organizations. But we've had some success in approaching that in the same grassroots way that we do our organizing, in that it doesn't always make sense to go right to an executive director, for example, or somebody who is in a position of that kind of authority, but to reach out to the other people who are doing this work day after day in community and relationship as survivors themselves, and to really call upon them to do what they can to leverage access to the resources they have within their organizations, to push back on decision makers and come to court and to offer resources and to join us in meetings with the state's attorney, which we have had recently with a number of folks from not only domestic violence organizations and other kinds of community-based organizations, but restorative justice groups, to really bring the conversation not only into the context of domestic violence and survivorship, but also to think about how we get to a place where we can actually think about what healing looks like, in that these cases always involve people who are already very personally connected, whether it's a case of an outcome of an act of self-defense being criminalized, or somebody being charged for the violence of their abuser against their children. I want to say, share some good news, that as a result of the work of everybody on this call, I am sure, in addition specifically to Moms United, Love and Protect, and the Chicago Community Bond Fund, and Northside Transformative Justice Center, we were able to prevail upon a court that denied Joy bond 4 times. She's been no bond since September of 2017. They finally agreed to give her a bond of $8,000 to walk, which is still bogus, but it was a victory. So she is out. We're really grateful that she is out of Cook County Jail right now. She's in a place called Grace House where she is able to get some support. She wanted to be on the call but doesn't have access to internet right now and is somewhat quarantined actually, because she's just coming out of the jail where there are between 250 and 300 confirmed cases right now. But she is there, and I feel like that is also gives us hope when we see so few people in these circumstances are given any bond at all. And pretrial release positions people much better to be able to negotiate for a better outcome in their case. Now for Joy, we actually had been moving towards some kind of outcome that would be involve no time. These victories in the context of a violent system are always sort of relative. However, we would call it a victory if Joy could come out and not have do any more time, and also have the hope of being reunited with her children, which is so important to her, because as Joy has said numerous times, she doesn't care as much what happens to her in her case if she's never going to see her children again. And that's a whole other piece of this that we could have a conversation about. And I know many of us are working not only in the criminal courts, but various kinds of civil and family courts, immigration courts, because there's this entanglement in this broader criminalization apparatus that harms mothers in particular ways. So we are glad that she's out on bond. We're hoping that we'll see an outcome soon in which she's truly free. Unfortunately, what the state is doing right now is claiming that they might be willing to offer something that's no time if she will testify her against her abuser. And they're thinking that maybe they'll just shift the charges to her abuser, who was, the immediate cause of the child's death. However, that's not the solution we're looking towards, right? I mean, not only is survivorship complicated, and her abuser has his own story of victimization and survival, that could be, and survival of, as a Black man in Chicago, of all kinds of systems of violence. To simply shift prosecution is not for us a victory when we're looking at the fact that this system existing at all is a reinforcement of gender violence, is contributing to this entanglement of interpersonalization or interpersonal violence and state violence that has always been there. And so we're hoping that what we can do is to push back on that as well, while we continue to support Joy to get free. Now, I failed utterly to send links in time to share, but hopefully Stacy can help us get those links shared with folks. We've got a case study that Moms United wrote with help from Colby and Kellyanne Savage. We've got a fact sheet that Moms United wrote with Alex for a panel that we did in August called Supermom Myths and Failure to Protect, and a bunch of other things, letters to the state's attorney. And we also have, share a website called, for something we're calling Free the People Coalition, that formed as a kind of a nascent network of mutual support organizations. And what we are hoping to do with that is really collectivize our demands. So to uplift the individual kind of participatory defense campaigns we're doing in the context of the demand for mass release. Because really what we're seeing is that some of the governors and state's attorneys are conceding to the idea of some level of release as a public health response, but a hard barrier for a lot of people is their conviction status and also their institutional record. And so clearly the state's refusal to even consider releasing people during the time of a deadly pandemic is a continuation of the violence that folks have already been suffering. And so we want to work with everybody to figure out how we continue to uplift these specific campaigns towards a narrative, a richer, fuller narrative around the demand for mass release. So I think that's all I've got.
Thank you so much for Holly for sharing all of the work that you and other folks in Chicago have been engaging in to free survivors. I want to just do a quick time check. I know we are a little bit over time. I think we were very ambitious with our agenda. We covered like 10 different defense campaigns. So there was just a lot of ground to cover. So thank you for your patience. But I also understand that if folks have to hop off or whatever, you can all totally do that. And we'll just continue to do Q&A, and I wanted to just flag some resources as well for folks to take a look at. So in terms of taking action, I think every person has outlined a way to take action to advocate and to fight for all these criminalized survivors' freedom. And there's actually a couple of upcoming events in the next 2 days that you can engage in. So one is the Clemency Now action, so urging Governor Newsom to free Leah and free all criminalized survivors. So that'll be generating calls and tweets all day tomorrow. There's also a virtual candlelight vigil to free them all for public health, targeting New York Governor Cuomo. So the ask is that you take either a picture or a video holding a candle in your home with a hashtag free them all for public health, and there's a typo there. So disregard that. That's also going to be all day tomorrow. And then also tomorrow at 4 p.m. Eastern time, is a panel talk called Moving at the Speed of Trust, Disability Justice, and Transformative Justice. That's going to be hosted by Barnard Center for Research and Action on Criminalization. And so that's going to be tomorrow at 4 p.m. And then a lot of us, I think almost every single one of us mentioned writing letters of support or writing letters of love to currently incarcerated survivors. And so we'll actually host a virtual letter writing event this Saturday at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. So we'll kind of give overview of, you know, what does letter writing look like to folks who are currently incarcerated, what are best practices, what are tips, and things that we should just be mindful of. And we'll actually get to write letters, and it's also an opportunity for everyone to connect with other like-minded folks who are trying to take action to really free them all and also to support survivors. And so we have the full list of events on our website, and the link is on the slide. So we can definitely send that over email as well as a follow-up item. The last resource that I wanted to highlight is our website, survivedandpunished.org. We have a lot of different toolkits and ways to take action that you can take a look at. One of the toolkits that I wanted to highlight was Survived and Punished, Survivor Defense as Abolitionist Praxis. It's a collaborative toolkit that was created by Love and Protect and Survived and Punished to really outline what are the different components of a survivor defense campaign. What does that look like? How do we make sure that when we do an individual defense campaign, it's not just about getting that one person out or exceptionalizing that one person, but about highlighting systemic failures in all the ways that the survivors have been failed by the criminal legal system, the family court system, the deportation system, and all those systems that exist. And so I really encourage folks to check it out. It's downloadable. There's also a printable version. So really encourage folks to take a look. So with that, I'm gonna move us to Q&A for folks who are willing to stay. Thank you all so much for bearing with us. And actually, one last thing is I wanted to read this quote from C.C. McDonald, a Black trans survivor who was criminalized for self-defense from transphobic violence. And so I wanted to read her quote to end the webinar before we move into Q&A. So C.C. said, "I want people to not just hear me, but to live through me, to live through this experience, to give themselves a platform, to talk about what they face, and so many beautiful, strong trans women now that are coming forward. And it's definitely a revolution coming, and I'm glad that I'm here for that I'm alive for that." So with that, thank you all so much for joining us on the webinar. I did want to read the questions that we got through the chat box. So the first, and I would love any of the speakers to take either or both of those questions. So the first question is from Allison, and Allison said, "What kind of support would be most helpful from mental health professionals and researchers whose work focuses on trauma from sexual assault? I'm connected with a lot of people who do that work, and I think there are many who want to be more politically active." So that's Allison's question. And then I have a second question from Sarah, who said, "I work in Fairfield County in Connecticut as victim advocate case manager through the VOCA Act grant funding by the Office of Victim Services. How can I get involved in cases that are within Connecticut or even in my area to help with some kinds of services? I have some connection with the DA in my district and also am part of the Reentry Collaborative within Connecticut. Would these connections help, and what else can I do?" So anyone want to take either of those questions? I can kind of touch base on to answer Sarah's question maybe. I think it helps for domestic violence organizations to push on the DA's offices based on their existing relationships. I think that does go a long way. So I think whenever there is a case of a survivor being criminalized or facing prosecution, I think official, DV organizations establishing that person as a survivor, I think that establishes and lends more legitimacy and does help a lot in the criminal trials. I think that's always helpful. And then I think for a lot of our defense campaigns, there's ways that you can sign up your agency to endorse like a defense campaign. So for example, for Leah's campaign, you can actually become an organizational endorser for the defense campaign. And so I think those are two of the ways that just come to mind.
Hey, Stacy, I had something to offer for Allison's question.
Go ahead, please.
Thank you for that question, Allison. I definitely appreciate it. As it relates specifically to our community, the community of like sex working people, specifically the collective that Alisha is a part of, that I'm a part of as well, Support Hose, we actually developed a health and wellness guide for care providing professionals to help push back on stigma and the pathologizing that sometimes happens against sex working people. There's this really common misconception that some kind of sexual assault or severe trauma causes people to go into the sex trades, as opposed to like the need for money or like resources or like housing. Like you would go into any kind of trade, for your survival. And so we were getting that a lot from people who purported to be advocates and wanted to like help, but were using really harmful language and practices around care provision. So we were seeing people call 911 on their clients when their clients would talk about needing to go back to their hustle or something like that. So we really wanted to create a toolkit and a resource. I'll drop a link to that guide in the chat box. It's also on our website. And so I'll link that to folks there. It's very introductory, but basically just tries to give people shared language around that so that we're not just equating the violence that's very real that we experience in this world, which is super racist and sexist and transphobic, but doesn't equate that violence inherently with someone's hustle or trade or labor. So I'll just drop that in case that's helpful.
I wanted to just add something really quickly. There's an amazing person, Sherelle Baldwin, and her mom. Sherelle is a criminalized survivor who was facing a first-degree murder charge and is free and in community with us now. But they had a lot of frustration during her case trying to connect with the DV community around Connecticut. And eventually some folks came around, I think, as a result of this national organizing we were doing in support. But they really are looking to connect still. So I would love to be able to connect anybody in Connecticut doing this work with Sherelle and her mom. So I'm going to put the Moms United email in the chat also. So if we could connect and I could make introductions, that would be awesome.
Thanks, Holly. And Colby, did you want to say something?
Yeah, one quick thing is that one of the things that we've been talking with some of the anti-violence groups and victim advocates in California and suggesting is, and I think this works also for mental health workers who want to support and get involved in trying to end the criminalization of survivors, is that, survivors who are criminalized are very quickly disappeared from the public. And even if they did try to access anti-violence services before that, they tend to have no access after they're incarcerated. So one of the ways to make connections with incarcerated survivors, certainly pre-trial, would be to run groups like mental health support groups or other kinds of empowerment groups in the jail. Victim advocate could lead a group in there, a mental health professional, trauma specialist could lead a group, and then that's a way to obviously offer direct survival support, but also to connect to who's in there. And to be able to help connect survivors, as they're facing prosecution with the resources that they need, including victim advocates. And, there's all kinds of complications with this, given that a lot of the DV victim advocate agencies or departments, right, are overly aligned with the prosecutors, and in terms of and then, don't provide services or don't pay attention to survivors who are being criminalized when they're on the defendant's side. So there's all kinds of problems with that. There's lots of groups who've put out good resources about how victim advocacy agencies can do more to support survivors. But I think one of the most important things is to connect directly with people after they're disappeared into the jails. And then, there's so much relationship building and support and resourcing and survival kind of solidarity that can come from there.
Yeah.
Kobe.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Okay, I'm gonna do. I think Alisha and Tammy both want to speak. I think. I just wanted to flag one thing I'll send out is Survived and Punished developed an internal assessment tool for DV agencies to see how they're not or they are supporting criminalized survivors. And so there's like an internal like checklist that you can go through. So I'll also send that as a follow-up item. And so I'll pass it on to Tammy and then Alisha to see if they have any additional answers and things to add.
I just want to kind of piggyback on Kobe. I am a survivor of human trafficking and domestic violence. And what she spoke about having those self-helps in the jails, those groups would allow a victim, a survivor, to be able to even go to courts and speak up for herself. Because I couldn't speak up for myself. I couldn't speak up for myself at all. But what I know now, had I known then, I would have been able to speak up for myself and not receive the sentence of life without parole. Also, so what Kobe spoke on, starting at the jail, having those groups, having that mental health would go a long ways for a victim of a survivor. It really would.
And I would just say, in addition to those concrete, really helpful suggestions, is to work collectively with other mental health professionals and researchers to expand the framework around prisons, understand their relationship with sexual violence. So develop a sort of comprehensive understanding of how prisons and jails and detention centers are centers of sexual violence rather than just institutions that you might work with, you might not work with, that may have a few bad actors, right? Really beginning to develop a more sort of community-based understanding of, how fundamental sexual violence is to the persistence of prisons and other punitive institutions.
Yeah, thank you so much, Alisha and Tammy, for sharing and for everyone. So I think we went way over time. So thank you all so much for just taking the extra time. And then can we get a round of applause for all our speakers? Yay, virtual applause. And thank you to participants for staying on for extra time, and we'll be sending out follow-up resources and some of the links that a lot of our speakers have mentioned. So
and
thank you all
you,
so much.
Stacy.
Yeah,
and thank you so much, Stacy, for facilitating.
Thank you. No problem.
Thanks, Stacy.
So I hope everyone has a great evening and will continue to take action to free them all. So thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks, everyone.